Hi, I just wanted to go over our first PowerPoint presentation, which I did not get a chance to do the night that we were in class. So I just wanted a very brief opportunity to cover this with you. So if you can open up this PowerPoint presentation to follow along with me, this would be great. I indicated during our first class session that research methods in public management settings really focuses on the ability to describe and explain patterns in reporting information that are collected by agencies. I noted that the primary reason why we collect information in agencies is for record keeping because of state statutes, certain local ordinances that we need to follow. But sometimes there is a secondary analysis that needs to be done of this information to focus on issues related to effectiveness of management practices. Is there effective procedures and approaches with persons in the field? And that's essentially the main focus of our discussions this semester as we look at the firefighter data set and the wildfires data set as it relates to management practices, different policy approaches that perhaps may need to be done because of the trends or patterns that we identify in the reporting information that's collected. So in a nutshell, the research methods in a public management environment focus on describing and explaining patterns in reporting information to facilitate policy making. Describe means to give an account of noticeable trends or traits in, for example, the firefighter and or wildfire incident reporting information. When it's aggregated, when the information is basically compiled in different categories to see what patterns emerge. Typically, as I noted in class, when what you are describing is the management problem. From a research methods perspective, this is called the dependent variable. As in public management, someone brings something to our attention via citizen complaint. When I was a planning commissioner, I had persons file complaints in our department that somebody did not file a building permit. We needed to issue a stop work order. You'd send somebody out in the field and had to address that. That's the management problem. So what you're seeking to describe in trying to identify noticeable trends or patterns is your management problem. And from a research method standpoint, this is your dependent variable. So for example, item number 4, here's some examples of what I mean. When injuries are common among different categories of firefighters. That's a management problem. What parts of the body exhibit the most frequent injury? What type of activity reveals the highest rate of injury? How rapid does a fire front move? What locations exhibit the highest frequency of suppression problems? This was a common issue when I was planning commissioner. I was a planning commissioner in a county that was a little bigger than 1,000 square miles. A big county, very rural county, mountainous. We would dispatch firefighters to handle a brush fire or a wildfire, and we didn't have fire hydrants. In many cases, we did not have dry fire hydrants. I'll talk about what those are in class. So there were a wide variety of policy issues that we had to deal with, and one of them was how do we have a water source available if we have to dispatch firefighters to an area, because at some point they're going to need access to water. The explanatory component, which is the second item of your research topic, really focuses on giving an account of what's causing the noticeable traits or trends in the firefighter and wildfire incident reporting information. Explain looks at cause and effect. Item 2 in your individual research assignment requires an explanatory approach. So when you're describing and explaining firefighter injuries and wildfire outcomes, it requires the use of of different research methods or statistical techniques. So what you're going to learn in this class is that there are descriptive research methods approaches, and then there are explanatory research methods approaches. And the choice of a different research technique is a function of how your management problem or how your variables are measured. In our first class, I talked about the levels of measurement. This is why I want you to read the measurement chapter. And you'll be introduced to 3 levels of measurement. I talked about those in class. There's typically 4. We're not going to be dealing much with ratio, but basically nominal is the lowest level of measurement. It's simply classification. The numbers that are assigned aren't used for numerical purposes. They're just simply to classify. So for example, in the firefighter data set, there is a variable in that data set I listed here as V4, and I'll talk more about what the variable numbers mean later in this presentation and more on Tuesday night. But in the data set, we have a type of firefighter, and it's broken up into 2 categories, career and volunteer. So in order for us to group the firefighters, we have to assign the career firefighters a number and the volunteer firefighters a number so that the software can break them up into different categories. So in this instance, we gave a career firefighter a code of 1 and a volunteer firefighter a code of 2. We did the same thing with gender. Variable 3 focuses on the gender of the firefighter, where 1 is equal to male and 2 is equal to female. And variable 10, was the physical condition of the firefighter. I talked about that on Thursday night, where 1 is equal to rested and 2 is equal to fatigue. Again, the numbers, the assignment of the numbers is strictly used for classification. When we get to ordinal, it's rank order. And an example of rank order is seriousness of the casualty, and you'll notice here 1 is equal to minor exposure, 2 is treated by a doctor, 3 is severe or life-threatening, and 4 is death. So what the numbers indicate is not only classification, but as the magnitude of the number increases, so does the severity of the casualty. The more extreme it becomes. I noted in our class on Thursday night that age can be an interval level variable. One of the things that you will learn in our class is that higher levels of measurement can be regrouped to be lower levels of measurement depending upon how you want to show the information in conveying trends. So in this instance, age can also be measured at the ordinal level versus the interval level. And I'll talk more about that next week. Finally, I mentioned interval level measures, and these are just simply continuous measures. They have not only classification and magnitude and direction, but they have differences between points. And I gave an example of that. And when you read the measurement chapter, that will also be conveyed to you as well. One of the key things that I noted in our discussion on Thursday night is that the choice of a research methods technique, okay, is dependent on how your management problem is measured. So if your management problem is measured just at the nominal level, your research methods approach that you're going to use is a frequency table. And I technically haven't defined it yet. I just want you to know that a common question that students ask, and it's a good one, is that why are there so many of these research methods techniques out there? Why do they exist? And the answer to the question is because your management problem will be measured different ways. So there's a research technique for your management problem being measured at the nominal level. There are different research methods approaches that can complement one another for a management problem that's measured at the ordinal level or the interval level. So understanding that the choice of a research methods approach is a function of your levels of measurement. Once you get that idea, you will basically understand why there are different research methods / statistical techniques out there. It's all based on measurement. Let's just take an illustration very quickly of working with a nominal or even an ordinal level variable with a management problem that's measured at the ordinal level variable and where we're going to use frequency distributions. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do this on Tuesday night with the software. But here's an example. In this slide, what we're interested in looking at is picking out patterns among firefighters by age. We're interested to know where do we find the highest frequency of firefighters injured by age. And you'll see that when SPSS, your software, makes a frequency table, it takes the raw counts of the firefighters. So let's just walk through some of the numbers here. There's a total of 1,524 injured volunteer firefighters in the NIFRS data set. And of that 1,524, 90 firefighters who were injured were between the ages of 16 and 19 years. Notice this is volunteer firefighters. So in some states, volunteer firefighters can be under the age of 19. They may be trainees. It just depends on local state law and how they're under the supervision of other firefighters when they're in training. There's 546 firefighters who were injured between the ages of 20 through 29 and so forth. Now, the raw counts don't really tell us much about the trends. They're used as a building block, however, and we need to convert our raw counts to percents. If someone comes to me and says, and this happened to me a lot when I was in public service, people would come to a public hearing and say, well, 80 people oppose this project. And I would say, 80 people, that doesn't tell me anything. Is it 80 of 80? Is it 80 of 10,000? So my point that I was trying to make is that give me the percent. If you say to me 40%, that's a lot different than telling me 80%. So whenever someone says to you, well, 20 people say that we should do this, your response should be 20 of what? 20 of 100, 20 of 60? And percents give us a much better idea of trends or patterns. So that's what SPSS does. It creates a percent and a valid percent. Now, why the difference between these two? The difference between these two is that the valid percent discounts missing data. See down here where it says missing system? That means that we had 117 firefighters for which the incident reporting forms didn't have their age. Why? It could have been as a result of the person who was filling out the incident reporting form, which could have been a shift commander, it could have been a fire chief or an assistant fire chief. Maybe they were filling out the form the next day and they just forgot to fill it in. Or maybe they forgot. So these things happen. So you're using real-world data sets where we're going to have incomplete information. So the valid percent column is what you always want to report because you want to exclude the missing data and only include the information for which you have complete data. And I'll talk more about that on Tuesday night. So don't report the percent. Always look in the valid percent column when you're going to report your trends. Don't worry about cumulative percent. So as I indicated in class on Thursday night, our eyes gravitate more towards something that's pleasant. So that's why we have a graph. We basically converted this table into a graph. And if you work with Excel, which many of you do, you could just take these percents, these valid percents, and plug them into an Excel file and get this, or you could have SPSS do it for you. And On Tuesday night, I will show you how that's done. But if you look at this graph, you can see the trends. And the only thing I didn't do, and I'll show you this next week, we can tell SPSS to put in a specific percent for us. But and once you produce this graph, and I'll help you produce this graph, this is basically going to become item 1 of your research team assignment, your RAM, your research assessment memo. And your discussion item topic will be your PowerPoint presentation on your frequency table. So just to walk you through what that's going to entail, you're always going to want to have your graphs labeled. You're always going to want to have your percents going down the side and the categories of your level of measurement running across this way. Now, when you're going to report your traits or your patterns in your descriptive analysis, always start with big and work to smallest. So you can do one of two ways. And this is the sample discussion item topic that I will go over with you, and I'm just basically covering this now. So in this case, you can see that close to 33%, well actually 35%, 35% of injured firefighters fell between the ages of 20 and 29, followed by 26% of injured firefighters between the ages of 30 and 39. Now, sometimes what you can do is that for the bigger categories, once you report them individually, you can aggregate them. So you could say that, well over half of firefighters who were injured fell between the ages of 20 and 39. And then you could jump to the smallest category and simply say that firefighters 60 years plus who were injured made up a very small proportion of injured firefighters. And that's it. Now, you don't need to go through and report every single bar. Just report the biggest ones that stick out and the smallest ones. And we'll talk more about that on Tuesday night. The other thing that you can do when you're working with ordinal level data and even interval level data is that along with the frequency distribution, you can also compare what we call measures of central tendency. And I'll talk more about these on Tuesday night. But essentially, we want to know are the data positively skewed or negatively skewed? And skewness, which refers to extremely high or extremely low scores that make up a small percentage, can become very hazardous in public management, particularly if external groups to your environment who may be adversarial to your department could use information against you. So it becomes very important not to overlook identifying skewness, because someone could make the claim that your department is not performing right when in fact your department is, but the only reason why it looks like your department isn't performing right is that you're dealing with a very small number of clients or cases that consume a large amount of your time, but by and large, if you adjust for that, you're performing pretty good. So at this point, that's all I'm going to say about that, because I want to return to this on Tuesday night when we talk about this, because this is a very important component that some of the research methods texts don't touch on in terms of surviving in the public sector. So we'll return to this next week. Let's come back to the measurement issue. I talked about on Tuesday night or Thursday night, the operational definition. Understand that when you get to the point of being able to identify your levels of measurement, then you have to formulate an operational definition. And an operational definition just simply describes the operations used to measure your items or variables. So the example I give here is from the firefighter data set, seriousness of injury. In the parentheses, that's the variable number. I wouldn't worry about that. You'll get familiar with the variable numbers once we get into the data set. But your operational definitions follow very strict protocols. And the protocol should be as follows. Give us the variable name, tell us what level of measurement it is, and then identify for us how those categories are measured. So let's put it together. Name of the variable, seriousness of injury, level of measurement is measured at the ordinal level, identify how the categories are measured, where 1 is equal to minor, exposure first aid, 2 treated by a doctor, 3 life-threatening, 4 is death. That's the protocol that you will use for this semester in identifying an operational definition. So what I need you to do is read the chapter on measurement, and then once you finish viewing this PowerPoint presentation, go to these assignments. For those of you that are on RT1, I want you to identify the level of measurement and develop an operational definition for these 8 variables. And for those of you on RT2, I want you to do the same thing. Identify the levels of measurement and give me an operational definition for these 8 variables. Just a quick overview of what we talked about here. We're always going to begin with a descriptive analysis before we get into explanatory. The idea of using a descriptive research methods is to identify patterns in the information that's been collected and typically show it graphically. And the graph is typically based on a frequency table. So just a few things. I wouldn't worry about item 1 right now because since we had the technical issues on Thursday night, I'm going to go over with you next Tuesday on creating a frequency table. But I do want you to develop your levels of measurement and your operational definitions. The discussion post is up. You have until Sunday, this coming Sunday, to post it up, and I will give you feedback. And hold off on the SPSS because I'll show you that on Tuesday night. So that, in a nutshell, gives us an overview of the first PowerPoint presentation, and I will cover more of this on Tuesday night. Any questions, please email me or text me. Thank you.